Hey there. Today I want to take a few extra minutes to share and dive a little bit deeper into some of the things that I covered in yesterday's short little reel where I went over some of the mistakes that students make during the low portion of the vinyasa, down dog, plank, lowering to the floor, cobra. We're not even going to talk about chaturanga and upward facing dog because that's a whole nother conversation. But I think if you're practicing at home, online, and you're doing classes, these are poses that are, notorious. They're a lot, not every class, but they're in a lot of classes, and it's really helpful to make sure that you're doing these to get the intended benefit out of the poses. Once you learn kind of one way that I'm going to teach you now, change it up, do different things. This doesn't mean that you need to do the pose this way that I'm going to show all the time. And obviously, if I was working with you one-on-one, I would adapt certain things. But in general, these are things that we want to look for. So let's talk about down dog. So in downward facing dog, hands are about shoulder width apart or maybe even a little bit wider. And then fingers are spread. We tuck our toes and lift up. So the common thing that I see are people trying to straighten the legs and then therefore rounding their back because their hamstrings are tight and it pulls and makes their back round. So my intention of the pose is to get more length in the spine, which would require us to bend our legs if we're tight in our hamstrings. So instead, I would bend the legs, pressing back, and then eventually as your hamstrings start to get looser, you can work your legs to straight, but don't worry about that right now. Just work with bent legs, and you might even, if you're newer, you can always shorten your stance a little bit here, okay? And then from here, we can come forward into a plank. We might have to walk our hands forward, depending if you're shortened your stance. And the thing that I often see are people kind of dipping in their hips. So try to use your core to lift your hips up, and then you're pushing the floor away. So you're not just kind of sinking in your upper back, pushing the floor away. Your gaze is slightly forward. A lot of times people want to look at their toes for whatever reason. Looking forward. If this feels like too much and it makes you want to drop your hips, lower to your knees. It's better to work in a place where you can sustain and do the correct effort rather than kind of compensate in the more progressed version. So here in this knee down plank, I'm still thinking about that lift through my core. I'm not just collapsing here, pushing the floor away. And then lowering down to the floor. I often see the worming down, as I called it, lowering your hips and then your chest. And that's really not going to build any upper body strength, which is what I want to work on. So instead, and you might, again, you'll have to work on this. It's not going to get better immediately. You might have to worm part of the way, but start to bend your arms, lowering your hips and your chest all at the same time. You might get about halfway and then you have to lower down. But make sure that you're working on it and you're trying to do that more and more. Again, it's not going to get better overnight. You just got to slowly progress yourself. Cobra, hands by our chest. A lot of times people will lift and lead with their head to make it seem like they're lifting up more. So I prefer to work with the neck neutral to begin with, rolling the shoulders back and really use your upper back muscles to lift you, maybe a little bit of weight in the hands, and making this more about the work in your upper back, not so much about pushing into your hands and lifting as high as you possibly can, and then lower. And then to come back up, same thing, we're trying not to worm up, so the worm would be chest and then hips, that's doing the worm. So instead, we want to lift hips and chest all at the same time. Again, that's going to take some practice. That's harder than the lowering down, so work on your lowering down, and if you need to warm up, you warm up, but you know that you're doing it and you're working on it. There's a difference between intentionally doing something, knowing that you're doing it, and doing something out of habit and kind of a blind spot. So I'm just trying to shine some light on potential blind spots that you might have and you might not know that you have if you don't have a teacher looking at you regularly. So now we would go back into our downward facing dog. And again, we're practicing legs bent, pressing back. We don't need to worry about straightening the legs. And again, you could work on a little bit shorter stance if this feels really uncomfortable. All right, so that's just that lower portion of the vinyasa. Work with those movements, really kind of fine tune, especially that lowering down and pressing up is really hard to start with. Just work on it. You can video yourself at home. You don't have to post it on Instagram. Just video yourself, watch yourself doing the movements, or, you know, have a one-on-one session with me. I do those, and I can look at you and see what we need to work on. And then once you get the movements this way, you can do the movements this way, then change it up. We want to be able to do a lot of different movements, a lot of different ways. But first, you need to learn one way. Let me know if this was helpful to you, and make sure you're on my email list, because tomorrow's Thursday, tomorrow I have an email going out sharing a new revamp of an online project that I'm creating that basically is going to include more one-on-one support and some "Am I doing this right?" sessions with a program that I already have I've already offered in the past. So stay tuned for that. Make sure on my email list and leave a comment below to let me know if this was helpful for you. All right, see you next time.